Is able to see that, I hope.
Looks good, Dan.
Okay. Looks like we have a couple more people coming. All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Paul, and thank you to everyone for attending this webinar Wednesday. I'd also like to note that I have a colleague of mine on the call. Trista, I don't know if you can say hi. She's our Indigenous engagement lead, and she has been the lead on this project and done a lot of the all of the research and development on this. So all the kudos goes out to her. I'm just kind of the mouthpiece today. She's also here to help answer the hard questions that that might come up, or any hard questions. As Paul noted, my name is Dan Matthews, and I'm the Manager of Strategy and Communications for Co-operatives First. Co-operatives First is a business development organization funded by Federated Cooperatives Limited and the Cooperative Retailing System. And if you're from Western Canada, you'll know them as the Co-op branded gas bars and hardware stores and grocery stores in most towns across the prairies. Our mandate is to promote and support business development in rural and Indigenous communities across Western Canada. And that business development that's centered around the cooperative corporate structure or business model. To do this, we offer a lot of free resources, such as business coaching, incorporation supports, online courses, workshops, feasibility studies, and business plans. And thanks to the generous support of our funding partners, we're able to offer these services largely free of charge. The only exception is the incorporation, which we do at cost. So my role largely includes, marketing the organization and services we offer, but I also get a lot of opportunities to work with groups that are starting co-ops. And in the past 4 years that I've been with the organization, and the organization itself has been around 5 years, we've seen 130 groups starting co-ops, and we've helped incorporate about 44 or 45 of them. So not a bad start, but we hope to do a lot more, and particularly alongside Indigenous leaders and communities and folks like yourselves. We also hope to be kind of recognized as, a valuable partner in this process. So especially in spurring economic development within Indigenous communities. So today, we'd like to introduce kind of, this is actually a full campaign more than just a guide, but the guide is a key component of it. And we are launching it actually March 2nd, so you're kind of getting a sneak peek into the guide, which is will be available in both print and digital versions. And the guide outlines kind of the different rules and challenges that groups need to be aware of when they are looking to set up a co-op, and in particular on a First Nation, because that is quite a different experience than off Nation. So the idea behind the guidebook began with questions that we've heard from Indigenous leaders and community members when we talked to them about the co-op model and how it might be used in Indigenous communities. People would often ask some pretty difficult questions that sometimes we couldn't answer, and so Trista would go off and do some research, and we'd get back to people. And over time, she had quite a collection, so we thought, why not package them up and share them more broadly and kind of more cohesively. So this guidebook is the result of that research and Trista's work. Like most guidebooks, though, it won't answer every question, and it can address every challenge the group is going to encounter, particularly on Nation. But I think, in fact, some of the answers actually just kind of create more questions. But the guidebook does address some of the most challenging aspects of starting a co-op, particularly on Nation. And perhaps more importantly, even the guide is a way for us to start a conversation, and especially with folks like yourself, which is what we're hoping to do today. So this is the the team. So I think a good place to start is at the beginning. What is a co-op? I think a lot of people tend to get caught up in what a co-op can be. For example, people think a co-op is gas bar or a grocery store, and or sometimes they feel that co-ops can only be nonprofit organizations. The fact is that people using the model can form any of these types of organizations. As a business structure, a co-op can be any type of business or organization. It has been used in all sectors of the economy, from oil and gas and to daycare, agriculture to hospitality. So the model is highly versatile. But what exactly is a co-op then? This is kind of the question, right? So simply put, a co-op is a business structure. It's like a limited partnership. It's like a corporation. It's slightly more complex than a sole proprietorship for sure. But in the end, it is simply a business structure. Once formed, a co-op is a legally incorporated entity, which is an important thing to note going forward. And it does act like a lot of other, like other incorporated entities, and it'll run into kind of the same challenges as them when we get to the on-nation side of the chat. So when someone holds a shareholding, if someone is a shareholding member of a co-op, they're part owner of that co-op and that business. And being a member of a co-op usually comes with benefits such as profit sharing, and it definitely comes with responsibilities such as electing a board of directors and voting on key decisions. So before we go a little too much further, there's and this is noted in the guide, that the co-op ownership is sometimes confused with community ownership. Despite that, a co-op is not community owned in that sense of a whole community owning the business. It's about a group of individuals, generally with similar interests. A group of farmers, a group of artists, who work together to kind of bring a service or a product, or deliver a service and a product for themselves. And I think this is an important distinction. Often on First Nations, a business is owned by the band government, and its leadership or economic development board oversees the business. With a co-op, its members own the business and make the decisions for that business or organization. Also, there's an opt-in process that is not often the case in community ownership. So you're not a co-op member just because you live in the community. You have to choose to join. But let's back up a little bit, and I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a history of co-ops in Western Canada, kind of more broadly, a very brief one, and then kind of hopefully outline how that relates to our talk today. So in Western Canada, the co-op brand, as I mentioned, is kind of ubiquitous across the prairies, and these co-op gas bars and grocery stores, hardware stores, and ag retails are essentially direct descendants of Canada's colonial history in Western Canada, and the settlers that leveraged the model used it to increase their purchasing power, to get vital supplies. They even formed the oil refinery in Regina, and which continues to play an important role in that organization. And in fact, the revenues from the refinery support many of the stores in those small towns that you see across the prairies, which likely wouldn't have a store at all if it wasn't for the model, because the markets are just too small. So the model has a powerful connection to economic development historically, and offers an alternative or supplementary support to relying on external influences such as large corporate entities or government. And in the early 1900s, like as I said, these settlers were often quite poor and in need of basic supplies, and they're also competing with things like oil monopolies out of the US for fuel for their farm businesses. So they joined forces, bulk purchased, and also used the model to market the goods to the broader world. During this time, they also formed credit unions and insurance mutuals to pool money and share risk. In Alberta and the US Midwest, the model was used to help bring electricity and running water to farms and rural communities when the corporate and government entities decided it was too expensive or not a feasible investment. We're seeing kind of similar efforts with broadband currently. But before farms got large enough to compete competitively market grain themselves in global markets, they also used the model to get what they considered fairer prices for their products by pooling, forming the pools that were well known across the prairies in the early 1900s. Also, many First Nations and Métis fishers have done a very similar sort of co-op, forming producer co-ops that started in shortly after the World War II, and quite a few of these have formed. There's Inuit artists have also formed marketing and producer co-ops like these to market their art around the globe. From a rural perspective, as the farms and sort of urban centers grew, the need for many of these little rural co-ops has largely been outgrown, and we've kind of seen a lot of amalgamations and even some shutting down. For those that haven't, we've seen some pretty spectacular scaling using the model. Federated Cooperatives Limited, of course, is one example. It's a co-op of co-ops and has around 170 independent co-op associations, which as a group run thousands of retail outlets and employ nearly 30,000 people. It's a $1 billion company. A similar phenomenon has taken place with credit unions, which now hold kind of billions in assets and employ thousands of people, and they too are kind of amalgamating. But the important point to note, I think, is that these groups of people chose to work together largely to achieve a specific purpose, and that purpose was many times competing or catching up with a larger global marketplace or more densely populated urban centers. In the case of the Indigenous fishing co-ops, though, which formed over a similar time period, is that their purpose wasn't growth specifically. They simply wanted to fish, and the purpose of forming a co-op has allowed them to fish. So they formed the co-op because of the many changes, kind of adapting to the many changes going on around them, so that they could continue to fish, not to grow their market share, but simply to continue fishing. And so the point there, I think, is that co-op can serve many purposes. And so I'd like to talk about a couple examples of that. One you're probably fairly familiar with. I think Trista has presented on this one before if you've attended her talk. We're big fans of this co-op, so we quite often share it. So River Select is a cooperative First Nations salmon fisheries in British Columbia. The fisheries are the shareholding members of that own the co-op. And the co-op in this case brings efficiency and cost effectiveness to the marketing, administration, and processing of salmon harvested. But by forming the co-op, the fishers, like the other fisher co-ops, can focus on fishing, and letting the co-op do the work of the processing and marketing of the fish. But more importantly, I think, than simply the cost-effective aspect and the focus on fishing, is that there was declining stocks and over-harvesting from commercial activity in the area for at least 150 years. And this kind of helped spark the co-op's formation because it gave them control, as they say, it gave them control over the portions of the rivers that they that were important to their livelihoods, their communities, and their way of life. So the co-op allows a relatively small scale First Nation owned fisheries to conduct a sustainable harvest using traditional methods while finding efficiencies through cooperation. And by working together, the 8 members maintain feasibility while also helping preserve their traditional fisheries. So, and while the co-op only itself only employs 4 people. It fosters, the livelihoods of hundreds of fishers and the communities that they live in. And, as they note, our commitment to the world around us means that you can enjoy the wild salmon today and for many seasons to come. So it's really the purpose of sustainability about a way of life, the ecosystem, and the communities that depend on them. Another example, I don't have a slide for this one, but is the technical services co-op that formed in Saskatchewan. And the co-op is currently struggling a bit thanks to the pandemic and not being able to enter First Nations during the, many that are in lockdown. ESL is a good one. And essentially originated with First Nations leaders that were unhappy with the sort of inconsistent and expensive technical services, particularly those related to housing, that the partnering First Nations were paying for, and that, they decided to work together and they formed a co-op. The co-op's purpose is to improve the quality of the technical services. So the co-op kind of acts as a through flow of materials and service providers, so that both the group purchasing cost reduction is achieved, kind of like many of the co-op stories we've been hearing here, as well as the oversight of the quality of the materials and services provided, though, by third parties and that are carried out on the First Nations. So they're really trying to elevate the quality of the performance of third parties that were operating on the nations, particularly related to housing. And we're very hopeful that once we're all vaccinated and able to travel again, that co-op will pick back up and get back to work. So my point in sharing these examples is that the way Indigenous leaders have chosen to use the model, but also the adaptability of the structure to a variety of purposes. So yeah, it can maximize value and it can create growth or sustain small market businesses, as the in the refinery example. But it also could serve other purposes other than growth and function quite well. In many ways, a co-op is like any other corporate entity. It's a legally formed entity recognized by some governing body, usually at a provincial or federal level. You can sell shares, you can attract investors, form legal partnerships, take out loans, protect shareholders through limited liability. Like a corporation, it can be either for-profit or not-for-profits. Its shareholders can be individuals, or it can be some other legal entity like a business or an organization. But there's some pretty key differences. Unlike most investor-driven entities, it provides service delivery or prioritizes service delivery over profit maximization, as we saw with the River Select. So this means the organization is designed to deliver a product or service to its member shareholders or members in a way that sacrifices maximizing profits in favor of improving the delivery of the service. So the model that doesn't mean that co-ops don't need profits. It's quite the opposite. I mean, everything needs to, in our current system at least, needs some form of profit to survive. Otherwise, the organization shrinks. But it does mean they should provide better customer service than their competitors. Co-op gas bars, for example, have people who pump gas, which is a bit unusual these days. And but a marketing co-op might extend, say, bulk purchasing savings or new gains in market access onto their members instead of issuing a cash dividend. And that would be a decision that is made by the group. The reasons members of a co-op might choose to do this is that the benefits of the service are of greater value to the group than the cash value created. That's an important point, I think. And the co-op model also distributes the decision-making power by common shares rather than volume of shares held by an investor. So everyone gets the same amount, has the same voice, same amount of votes around the table. Finally, the co-op distributes profits based on use, not the number of shares owned. So the more a shareholder uses the co-op, often the more they benefit. In the case of a consumer co-op, like a gas bar or grocery store, the more you purchase, the larger your patronage payment can be. In the case of marketing co-op, the more business the more the business uses the co-op, often the better their cost savings and their own personal revenues are. So why incorporate? As mentioned, the co-ops are incorporated. And to incorporate a business means you've applied to an government entity to make it a legal entity. Not all businesses are incorporated, but incorporating does have some advantages. Being incorporated means your business has the same rights as a person. Can open a bank account, enter contracts, own things, borrow money. It also gives the members of the co-op limited liability, which means owners aren't responsible for the cooperative's debt and can only lose what they've invested in the business. So an incorporation, it does vary from province to province. So although First Nations are under federal laws and policies, the co-ops are usually incorporate and are regulated at a provincial level, unless you're operating across Canadian provincial borders. In that case, you might incorporate at the federal level. So as part of the guide is very basic steps to incorporation. You reserve a legal name. That could be 123 Cooperative Limited, but you might decide to trade as something else using a different name. But so you register a name with the governing body. And once you've reserved a name, you'll need to submit incorporation documents in the jurisdiction that you want to operate in. As mentioned, it's usually provincial. We also offer a service that we can do this on your behalf if it is kind of a cumbersome process, and it can kind of derail a project sometimes by just through the distraction and kind of the number of loopholes that you have to go through. So we've tried to kind of streamline that process. So once you've submitted your incorporation documents, then you're a legal entity. And these documents will outline things like the co-op's purpose, its share structure, any restrictions, incorporators, and the starting directors. And from there, you have to create bylaws. And the bylaws establish the rules and procedures that govern how a co-op operates. They regulate things like how someone becomes a member, how directors are elected, financial management, meeting procedures, how to make changes to the organization. Sometimes you have to submit these with your incorporation papers, but often you're allowed to submit them later. So more specifically to attempting to start a business or a cooperative on First Nations, there's some pretty key considerations. One is the role of leadership. In our experience, we think if you're looking to start a co-op on Nation, approaching leadership and your land manager early on in the process is kind of key to any chance of success. So starting a business on Nation, that often involves complexities that businesses in other jurisdictions don't have to deal with. Obviously, legislation and rules imposed by the government of Canada. And First Nations political leadership does often get involved in the community's business ventures. So one of the first steps in co-op, as I said, it should be to speak with leadership about the rules and legislation that apply to your business. Bands can also approve any business's capital requirements, such as buildings, utilities, land designation, and natural resources a co-op might need if engaged in, say, agriculture, production, fishing, hunting, and other types of harvesting. So the role of elected leaders is to ensure the well-being of the nation and its band members, and they govern things like housing, education, land policy, development, and economic development. So businesses tend to be more successful if they have their support. And working with leaders and getting them on your side can give your co-op a welcome boost. So a couple ways that leadership can support the development of co-op is often economic development. There's often economic development funds for entrepreneurial projects. Also, the First Nation can become a member of the co-op. The co-op members and board must decide if that's a good idea, and and how that relationship might work, because it is still a one member, one vote structure. Um, the co-op can also sell investment shares to the First Nation, and some nations sometimes invest in a business if they think it will offer return. So if you're able to convince leadership that the co-op is a good investment, that might be an option. Also, getting loans from, say, credit union or bank or AFI with the assistance of the nation could be another avenue. Financial institutions often have different rules about lending to a business on nation because of the Indian Act. Lenders may want a guarantee from the band itself, or a contract that permits the financial institution to enter the community and seize property if the co-op defaults on the loan. So just going to kind of slowly go through, quickly actually go through some of the restrictions of operating a co-op on nation, and then I'll move on to some financial aspects where you can raise money. So yeah, the obvious starting place is the Indian Acts, which have been around since 1876 and still governs status, bans, and reserves. The Act is a paternalistic set of laws that regulates the daily lives of quote, registered Indians. It allows the government to control status, land, resources, education, administration, and the Act's restrictions can make starting a business on nation a pretty cumbersome process. And the two most significant areas that it causes problems is the taxation and property rights. So I think first we'll talk a bit about, first, if you're going to operate a business on a First Nation, you're going to have to get things approved by the Canadian government. It's essentially the short story on that one. So if a nation has opted into the First Nations Land Management Act, it can withdraw from some of the land-related sections of the Indian Act, and it can draft its land code and set rules regarding the band's management of land, including the governance, laws, accountability, and land and resources. Under this act, the Crown or Canadian government still owns land. It can't be sold outside of the band, but steps like environmental assessments and permits take less time this way. Working under the Act also eliminates delays often caused by Indigenous Services Canada, or whatever the name is at the time. The First Nation can create sort of more efficiency and clear communication, and create more security as well. So if your nation has opted into that act, you'd have to ask the band for a copy of its land code and kind of review the code to see how it might affect the setup of your co-op. Another option is the First Nations Fiscal Management Act. This act allows First Nations to create their own property tax system, kind of like municipalities. Through collecting property taxes, bands can raise money for infrastructure, economic development. And so if your nation is signed up for this act, you'll have to understand the sort of local tax codes. We actually had a conversation with Chief Darcy Bear from Whitecap, Dakota First Nation, and recently, and we captured it in a podcast that'll come out at the end of February, I think, Tristan, right? Yeah. And he does an excellent job of capturing sort of the importance of thinking through this process from a leadership position, and their sort of choice to move towards self-governance. It's a fascinating conversation. So if anyone's interested, feel free to email me after this, and we'll make sure to forward that podcast to you. Finally, the sort of First Nations Goods and Services Tax Act, which Chief Bear pointed out was the FNGST. And so they decided to change the name when they enacted it. But so it's a way for First Nations to collect goods and services tax, which is, would be charged to its members and anyone who visits. It's often equivalent to a GST, 5%. That's something to keep in mind if your nation has that, is operating under that act. The second thing we want to kind of tackle is the property tax. So if your business is going to be involve commercial property on nation, there's a fair amount of things to think about. So, land that's not on nation can be owned outright. We call that a simple fee ownership. And that means the owner has exclusive rights to the land without any sort of conditions or restrictions. The downside of that, of course, is they're subject to Canadian provincial taxes. Because the Indian Act on nation land is treated quite differently. The government of Canada technically owns First Nations land, and it can't be owned by anyone else. So the government can grant the right to use reserve land, but the legal title still belongs to the Crown at the end of the day. And that means land can't be mortgaged or pledged or charged to a non-Indian, though a lease on land can be mortgaged, oddly. It also means that all land transactions must be approved by the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada or the Governor in Council. And to be granted an allotment of land, you have to apply first to your First Nation, which will need to approve the application through a bound council resolution, and then it has to be approved further by the minister, Canadian minister. So there are kind of three options for dealing with the sort of with land rights, and that's the customary or traditional rights. These are kind of your most common property rights on nation. The man can grant customary rights to land through a BCR. The rights can't be sold, but they are often passed down through families. The government of Canada, of course, doesn't recognize customary rights or consider them legal. So, there's not a lot of security there. Council could evict occupants at any time. And then it also means that they're not ideal for establishing a business because you won't be able to use it to kind of leverage a mortgage probably. The other is certificates of possession. They're also kind of the closest the band member can get to owning a land on nation. The act is proof that you have a permanent rights to non-designated land, allowing you to occupy, develop, lease land, or sell your rights to another member of the nation. So if you hold a certificate of possession, like I said, it's similar to owning land, but it's still ultimately owned by the Canadian government. This means the land can't be legally seized under Section 89 of the Indian Act. So even if you have the right to use the land, you can't use it as collateral or equity. So it is one of the most common methods for securing land for development, though. So to obtain a CP, you will need to apply to your band, which will have to pass the BCR, and that application will include the name of the band member or members who wish to acquire the land and the description of the land. And once the band is approved, the CP also has to be approved by the minister. So again, we kind of want to emphasize that you'd want to approach your land manager early on in the process and get their support. You may also want to seek some legal advice, which is something we can also help with. Finally, is the lease agreements, and these are complicated. Unlike the non-First Nations land, the lease must be approved by BCR. They're sent to a local ISC office and then to Ottawa. And this process takes a long time because there's actually a separate land title system for registering leases on reserve. So registering off nation can be done in pretty much a day, but the Indigenous land registry system takes quite a bit longer. So it's something to keep in mind in planning and scheduling. First Nations under the FNLMA have a different type of system. The First Nations land registry system, self-governing nations have yet another act to keep in mind. So lease agreements allow First Nations to enter into like long-term land use agreements that can be negotiated with band members and non-band members. However, because they are temporary, they are less secure than leases off-nation, and again impacting financing of a non-nation business or co-op. There are usually three ways land can be leased on a First Nation. The bands under the Indian Act, the corporate register and the band will usually negotiate these leases, and the Saskatchewan register, for example, has templates for leases that it expects people to follow. For bands that have signed into the FNLMA, the First Nation has its own leasing process and makes its own decisions. The third type is the bucksheet leasing, and that's where First Nation is not opted into land management legislation, but negotiates and grants the lease without ISC approval. This type of leasing is common, but not legally secure for a co-op or a business. So each situation is quite unique. No First Nation has the same rules or enforcement codes related to lease agreements, which is why, again, engaging leadership and the land manager early on in the process is really, really important. All right. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there. Is a bit more in the it does get a little bit complicated in terms of designation and traditional land versus the Indian Act land and off nation. So I would like to note though that First Nations can of course purchase land off reserve for economic development and can own this land as the fee simple real estate. Of course, this land is subject to property taxes, and people that work there may have income taxes to consider. Yeah, that's kind of the negative and complicated portion of the guide. But I think if you're engaging the community early on, and there's you're delivering a valuable service, and there's good reason to work through the process. And like I said, there's a lot of supports available. We are more than happy to help people guide people through the process as well. So onto the kind of the feasibility and planning side of starting a co-op. We like to start generally with understanding the feasibility of the business. And like I said, we do offer feasibility and business plans through an application process, a competitive application process that is at no cost to the group that's looking to start a co-op. So if you've identified a problem and you're forming a co-op to solve that problem, you may want to provide a product or service that the community doesn't have at the time, or try and create jobs, whatever. Like I said, it could be any sort of purpose. But you got to make sure that you state clearly how the co-op solves that problem. And if you can't explain it simply, work on it as a group until you can, because it's really important that your focus and purpose are clear. You got to be able to identify why customers or clients or consumers will want to choose your co-op other options, for example. You're going to have to describe how the co-op operates. Does it need people? Does it need facilities? Kind of costs are involved in that. Define what success looks like for your business, and assess the costs and benefits of the business. So new businesses don't have a lot of firsthand information. So your feasibility study is going to rely largely on kind of educated guesses and secondary data, but it's a crucial process to go through just so that you get people aligned and you better understand the sort of the problem that you're trying to tackle. So a feasibility study should include, as a note here, technical feasibility. What resources does the co-op have access to? Does it need electricity, computers, internet, hardware, that kind of stuff? Will it need a building? Does your location meet the requirements that you need? And also key that you have probably people that are knowledgeable in the technical aspects, or at least there's a way to get them trained quickly. The economic feasibility, usually, kind of cost benefit analysis that evaluates all the potential costs and revenue of the business. And this is a big part of figuring out if the business is viable. Understanding the economic feasibility will also help the co-op ask for political or community support and understand its financial needs and where it can get assistance. Legal feasibility, obviously, that's can be a very big one. I think that's true across the board. It's vital to have good knowledge of your First Nations laws and regulations and its relationship with the Indian Act. So a good feasibility study will make sure the project meets those requirements and relates to things like, related especially to things like land, capital, data protection, and any social media laws that might be applicable. The operational feasibility is looks at whether it meets the needs of the shareholding members. That's it. Does the co-op do what it's supposed to do? And then this scheduling feasibility, which is how long is this going to how long is the co-op going to take to set up, begin operations, and start to deliver on the promise that it's made. So the best feasibility studies are objective. You don't want one that is colored in rose-colored glasses, because a co-op is a little bit different than some other businesses in that it does often involve, a group of people from a tight-knit community, and if it goes south, it can really sour what is generally, a well-intentioned get together of people in an organization. So when co-ops fail, it does tend to cause a lot of negativity. So you want to really make sure that you know what you're getting into, and really try and galvanize the people that are involved so that you see it through to the end. Another aspect is of course the business planning. What problem is the business solving? Who should be involved? What it will cost? How will we finance it? The sort of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Very traditional aspect of business planning. We have an online business planning software that we make freely available at the coopcreator.ca, and that business leaders and entrepreneurs can work their way through that for free on their own. The other option, like I said, is you can apply through to have a business plan done by a third party through us at no cost. Or you can work through it yourself. There are tons of templates out there and available, and we have links and access to lots of supports on that side of things. If you have a consultant write your business plan, though, it's still important, very important, to collaborate closely with them to ensure the business plan matches your expectations. So even if you don't write it yourself, you need to know what your business plan says inside and out, so you can pitch it to lenders, potential supporters, members, leadership. The consultant is really just a facilitator and provides advice, while you're the one that's going to have to go and take and make this business a reality, this co-op a reality. So some of the financing options that are available to businesses in general, but also some in particular to co-ops, is internal financing. So according to the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, First Nations business startups tend to rely on personal savings as financing sources. Co-ops are often financed through share capital and raised through sale of membership shares or investment shares. But that is a key factor, is that there is going to have to be a little bit of skin in the game when anytime you're starting a business, but and that includes a co-op. Sometimes that's sweat equity, sometimes it's actual dollars from your pocket. Another option is share capital. For-profit co-ops usually incorporate with share capital, meaning their members buy shares in the company. Co-ops usually issue two types of shares: membership share or common share, and investment shares, which are in Saskatchewan called preferred shares. So membership share, or the common share, means you have equity in the business, and that can range from $5 to $5,000, and they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. And you really need to kind of think through what best fits your situation, and kind of build that into your bylaws and your business plan. And if you're forming a not-for-profit cooperative, quite often we'll have members pay a membership fee rather than holding equity in the company or receiving dividends. So the membership shares are a quite typical way for co-ops to raise capital. And once you buy one, you're part owner of the business, like I said, and that gives you the rights and responsibilities such as voting, running for the board, receiving a share of the profits and whatnot. And then the other option is investment shares. Investment share gives people a way to kind of make more significant investments in the co-op. Investment shares cost more than a membership share, obviously, and people tend to buy them to get a return on investment. In that situation, you would write an agreement that outlines things like the rate of return and payment schedule, whether it's equity or a loan. Investment shareholders can buy more than one share, but to be an owner of the business, they'll still have to buy a membership share. And importantly, they still, despite the higher level of investment, they still only get one vote at around the membership table. So that's key difference between the cooperative and the investor-owned corporation. So once a cooperative is in a stable financial position, it can repurchase these investment shares if it chooses. Investment shares don't have to be issued just when the co-op is starting up either. One in Saskatoon here is issuing a new, the solar co-op here is issuing a new share offering. That's their second or third. And you can sell them when the business is operating if you want to raise money for a project or expansion, which is happening with the solar co-op here. So the last option, last three options, I guess. There's external financing is accessing capital in one of the more accessing capital is one of the most significant barriers to setting up a co-op, and that's particularly true for First Nation. And according to the Indian Act, on nation land can't be legally seized, and that means you can't use it as collateral. So if a borrower doesn't get paid a loan, the lender wants to know that it can take something to recoup its costs. And this makes it pretty hard to borrow funds. Lending institutions are reluctant to give loans to businesses, startups in general, but also particularly on First Nations lands because the loans can't be secured. Also, bands are almost entirely excluded from commercial and consumer credit rating systems, and not having a credit file also makes it pretty difficult to borrow. So yeah, it's considered risky. Another option is band capital. If your band is willing to invest in your co-op, that's a huge advantage. While some options for financing are listed here, are none guarantee to provide funds that you need, and band that supply startup funds regardless of the possibility of a return or your best chance of getting a cooperative off the ground. So again, it really harkens back to the starting the conversation early with leadership in the community and ensuring you have broad support for the co-op. Co-ops are also, credit unions are also an option, and they're cooperatives themselves, so they sometimes are more likely to support the co-op. They also tend to be more community focused. So if you are delivering a service that is they consider of value to the community, it's very likely they'll take a riskier approach and lend money. Sometimes they'll even grant it. And then the last option, of course, is the Aboriginal financial institutions, which are First Nation specific institutions that can help with financing. They exist to provide lending and support services to Indigenous business ventures. The loans they provide are often smaller than conventional financial institutions, but they better understand and are more likely to approve a First Nations businesses funds. Co-op is included in that. And they exist in every Western province and have provided around 2.3 billion in loans to Indigenous businesses. So one of the things to keep in mind when applying for credit or looking to secure a loan or investment is the sort of 5 C's of credit. And they look at the people involved, they look at the operations and what kind of cash flow, what stability it has or could have, how much money you've put in or are willing to put in, market conditions or environmental conditions, whether they look favorable to the organization or business, and the collateral or assets that the co-op might have or could have. Yeah. So very quickly, look at taxes last here. And so cooperatives are incorporated legal entities. So they're, like I said previously, they are like most businesses that try and operate on nation are subject to similar sections of the Indian Act. But they do allow for the tax exemption status under the Income Tax Act if they meet the very specific requirements here. If they don't, then they're 100% taxable. So yeah, taxes on nation are pretty complicated, and so if you form a co-op on nation, you're going to want to be keeping impeccable records. So you need to be aware of and track what taxes apply to which employees, which customers, which transactions and purchases, and how much work is done both on and off nation. Then the consequences for not properly charging or remitting GST, for example, can be pretty harsh. The CRA may demand repayment, charge interest, garnish incomes, seize assets, or even pursue criminal charges if they deem it necessary. Although we can't claim an exemption on tax in the Section 87 of the Indian Act, co-ops can deduct their staff's wages before determining their taxable income, which is an advantage for the co-op. They can also deduct any dividends that they issue before determining taxes. Together, these allow for a lower corporate tax rate for the co-op. All right. So I think that is a heavy place to stop, but I do want to kind of emphasize that it's a lot of information. Some of it's negative and a little bit overwhelming, but the reality is that starting a business on nation is hard. Starting a business is hard, and co-ops have the advantage of you're not doing it alone. You have a lot of supports amongst your group who's starting the co-op, often from a community that's interested in seeing the service or a product brought to the community. You have groups like us, as well as other co-ops and credit unions that are often very open to helping support other co-ops, and that's a pretty key advantage when you're faced a lot of barriers, and yeah, so it can be done, and we're here to help. And if you're considering whether you're considering developing a co-op on nation or off, we're more than happy to explore business ideas anytime, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Are there any questions for Dan at this point? If you can write them into the chat function, then we'll read them and Dan can answer them. Please be aware again that this session was recorded and will be shared on candoedo.ca page probably later this afternoon, as well as Dan's presentation. So if you thought you've missed something, fear not, you'll be able to access that. Also, I've listed in the chat the co-operatives website, and so Dan's email address. I wanted to follow up. Oh, I've got a question here. Dan, any governance training presentation opportunities that can be scheduled for band councils?
We have two products related to governance that are that could be relevant. We have the online governance course, which is specific to co-ops, and there is also we have a workshop in person Zoom type thing that we offer startup cooperatives early on to kind of just go through the procedures and roles and responsibilities of a board. Trista, did you have something you want to add?
So those are the current ones. So shortly after the release of the document, we'll also be setting up a webinar for specifically creating Indigenous opportunities. So it is the same information, but with Indigenous case studies and examples. So working through the governance and also the opportunities of creating a co-op.
Yeah, and like I said, like we are happy to meet with groups anytime. If you were looking to, look at how a cooperative business might work on your nation, we'd love to explore that opportunity and that idea. So. All right. Any other questions at all?
So I'm seeing a question about give examples. So throughout the guide, we do highlight 3 examples of current Indigenous cooperatives. So there's 3 different structures. One is actually one of our newest ones, so they're not quite operational yet, but it is an arts co-op in Northern Alberta, and that one is set up as kind of a multi-stakeholder structure where there's the artists themselves are members, and then there's also organizations that would be selling the product. And so the way that they set up their co-op is very helpful because it actually shows the entire product pathway from the artist all the way out to the sellers and distributors. We also have the River Select, and we have a nonprofit smaller cooperative called the Food Forest and Learning Center. But throughout this entire campaign, we will be highlighting and more Indigenous cooperatives throughout. So we would encourage people to come and visit our site starting in March. And then we'll be having more and more resources available highlighting the Indigenous cooperatives and also kind of best practices, whether or not they are for strictly Indigenous co-ops or Indigenous business in general. So we are excited to be launching this. And we're also very excited for the participants here today to see, you guys are actually the first group outside of our organization to see the new design and our campaign.
Yeah, and the website that we're launching is going to include a section with case studies. So I think that those will be a pretty useful kind of to help answer your question on the ones that are successful and the ones that have gone kaput. Because and I think it's good that you note the ones that have failed too, and I think we should consider putting up case studies of that as well, so that there's lessons to be learned. Yeah, there's definitely examples of both for sure. I mean, we're very excited about the River Select co-op. We share it a lot. And same with the tech services. But I mean, the tech services right now is very much in danger of going kaput because of COVID and an inability to kind of to get on First Nations right now because of the lockdown. So.
So yeah, if there's any questions or want to talk about opportunities, like just feel free to reach out to us and we'll be in touch.
All right. Is Paul frozen? Well, thank you everyone for joining. I'm not sure Paul is able to communicate right now. Really appreciate you being here.
I can hear you now. Sorry, everybody, my laptop froze just when we were getting to the question and answer.
That's all right.
So thanks everyone for taking time today. Please visit the website, as I've mentioned a few times, for the recording and for additional presentation materials. Thanks again, everybody.